I feel the need for literacy. This is Illiterate. This week we are covering Top Gun. I just checked out the nearly 4 decades in the making sequel film Top Gun soared to the box office this weekend. Taylor.
Wow, I looked into production agreements between Paramount and the Pentagon.
Good Lord, we're going to get into all of it. I've been waiting to see this movie for 4 years. My wife worked on the post team for this, and I have not known a thing about it for forever. So I got to go to the cast and crew screening last Wednesday. We went again this weekend. It's just been an incredible ride. It's 300 million worldwide box office. I mean, it's just been a joyous occasion. And here we are doing it for the show. I couldn't be happier. My God, everybody is talking about it. So let's get right into it.
Yeah.
What in the world is the real Top Gun? What is the precedent for these types of things? When have we seen this done before? I'm excited. Can you tell?
Because Evan has had to not be able to talk to his wife about this for a long time. This has been
a long time.
Years and years.
It's a big chunk of our existence that just we had to ignore like a giant elephant in the room.
Yeah. So now they're gabbing it up.
She worked on it long enough that I was invited to work on it for a short time. So like it was insane. And then the pandemic happened. So
before even.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. There we go. No longer. I digress.
Yeah. Top Gun, the school itself, is a real thing. I didn't know about it at all because of the fallibility of cinema in making it dramatic and exciting. So this started
right now. It's this like misnomer. It kind of applies to any you're
flight
Top Gun to anything, right? You know, so like you're just the best of the best. So like I don't now. It's so almost generalized that it's the Navy, you know,
right?
Like it is. So like that. I think it'll be helpful for everybody for us to like really get down to the definition here.
Yeah. So in the early years of the Vietnam War, what they call the kill ratio for the Navy's flying squadrons, which would be the number of enemy aircraft to U.S. fighters lost, was 2.5 to 1 in the early stages of the Vietnam War. But this is atrocious in terms of who they think they're going up against, in terms of the quality of the planes and whatnot. Because in World War II, it was 14 to 1. And in the Korean War, it was 12 to 1. And that's only a couple decades before. So how did it drop so horrible? They get this guy, Frank Alt, who's one of the captains, and this is his big report, the Alt report, and he's investigating a ton of stuff related to everything to do with the Navy and their flying programs, and offered 104 recommendations about how to fix everything, top to bottom, organizational, how the leadership was structured, the technical quality control because the missiles were horrible and misfiring. And then the big thing was also improving training. And so one of the suggestions was to establish this advanced fighter weapons school with core instructors to correct and disseminate tactics. And then the Top Gun is the moniker that it was never officially called, but it was on the sign on the shack. Yeah. So, and the reason
that's where we all start, Taylor, on the sign on the shack.
Definitely. Yeah. And with that comes, some people thought this was a stupid idea. So that's the mythology of it's this rebel underground secret base in Hoth, Star Wars reference. Like they're just going by their bootstraps. And it kind of was that because the first class was in March of 1969, only 2 months after the report was published. So they really slapped it together as one of the 104 recommendations to getting it done. And so it wasn't just the Navy that went. It was at the start Navy and Marine Corps sending their best pilots to train. That's what I got confused with. It's like it is for the best of the best, but the whole point is that they return to their squadrons and pass along the knowledge. They got lectures on teaching and learning, briefing and debriefing. It was because we can't overhaul everybody that's in the air.
Our pilots are like a virus. They will infect everyone around them and make us all better. You want us to infect everyone, sir? That's right.
Yeah. Is that in the first one?
No.
Oh, yeah.
I was just joking.
Well, it sounded straight out of, that's essentially what the point of it was. And so this, 4 weeks to train also, you think it's like, they're going in. It's not like a Navy SEAL thing where it's like a year in basic and then a year out in the field. And no, they threw them in for 4 weeks, learn everything different than you did and pass it on. And so when the air war was resumed and bombing was resumed in Vietnam 3 years later, the rate was back up to 13-to-1 kill ratio. So
Wow.
it proved that this
It
did the
worked.
it worked. The program had a ton of changes, which I can't get into all of them. I was looking at articles with guys that had been through it and then became instructors. That was a big thing where it was like, oh, once you're done, come back here and teach for 4 years or however long you want.
Right.
And I guess that's some of the conceit of this new one is that he has come
Exactly.
back. Yeah.
The
Um,
return after 36 years.
yeah.
And it's kind of that, I mean, fitting in with just cinema trends, we have the old generation mentoring the new generation. And so it's kind of interesting to see Tom Cruise do that.
Mhm.
It's a bit of, it's a delight, and it might be better than most of other comparables in that kind of genre there.
Because I had seen he had done tons of, because he's a pilot himself and whatnot, and they had gone through all this rigorous rigmarole, the young blood, to get them ready to take on G forces.
He like really took on his producer role in a sense that like few ever do. He's not only is he producing it, but he's the star of it. So it's an odd parallel to the director Joe Kaczynski, because Tom is such the nucleus of it all and understands the whole picture of it all. It was it seemed almost like he's pseudo directing it. Had me thinking of like, was he going to direct something one day? Because he basically can do it. He's
Yeah.
doing it now, like, and no skin off of Joe. Like Joe's an incredible director, but it was amazing to see the weight put on Tom's shoulders to impart onto, much like the Top Gun program,
Right.
impart onto his actors and team what the vision was, schooling them on camera angles and editing, so that they understood the mission charged to them, so that when they went out to go spend thousands of dollars a second, everybody knew what to go capture.
Well, it almost ties in a way to some of the changes that I saw that were happening with the program in the mid '80s. So one of the things was the instructors then started flying under what they call blue air, which is as part of the student formations, not just red air, where they were pretending to be the antagonists.
Oh wow.
So that, according to some of these things, got guff from the people that were like, "Well, that's not how we do it."
Mm.
It was a big
Hmm.
change,
Hmm.
but to be on the student side to actually coach in the team as opposed to just being the antagonist seemed to help a lot
Okay. Yeah.
with the changes in technology, as well as they added a whole air to ground syllabus, which lengthened the class to 9+ weeks, which was also then heavily, because that's also some of the misnomer of the movies from in my mind is like, who's doing dogfighting anymore? Like, are we just
Right.
circling planes?
They
Isn't
like
it like,
they
yeah.
even say in the new one a couple times, like they try to throw out some stats, and the stats are so small and like insignificant that it's hardly like a stat. It's like he's the only pilot with two combat kills,
Yeah.
since like 1977, and just like
Yeah.
awesome, like, or 1980, or since the 80s or something.
Yeah, yeah.
I'm like, yeah, and in those couple like lines, it actually drew me back to thinking of like the real reality of what the difference is here between what we're seeing on the screen and what the real program is. Because again, I said out of touch with the reality. It's drama, it's fiction, it's art, and that is a lot different than going to school to to learn how to fly a fighter jet.
Right, yeah,
Yeah, yeah,
which
yeah.
kind of leads us to sort of talking about the old film from '86 because it does beg the question. '86 is not in a obvious time of war, and then
Right.
how do
So
you
I
create.
had
Yeah, yeah, go ahead.
I had a kind of a bunch of general questions in retrospect on this whole thing, because this seems like the biggest non-franchise I've ever seen. Up until this weekend, it was one movie, but its touch on the lexicon and zeitgeist of our culture is indelible.
Mhm.
The terms I feel the need for speed, goose, you're my wingman, all that. Like you can't go to a bar without referencing Top Gun, let alone like being in the Navy. Like,
Yeah, yeah.
it's a huge cultural, it's left a huge mark on our culture.
Mhm,
So my question being, knowing that the film is in drama, it's art, it has touched our culture
mhm.
and led us to believe in some sort of fantasy kind of. So I'm constantly thinking about, well, how was the original developed in terms of how did we land on that depiction of what this is compared to the reality, because it ended up creating a bunch of factors that led to something that has stayed with us for nearly 40 years now.
Yeah.
So I'm really curious what led into the development that created that, because there are elements in that first movie that are still there in the new one that I don't know where they came from. Like,
Yeah.
I don't, in terms of like, they're not part of the military. They're not, am I making sense? Am
Yeah.
I
No,
making
of
sense
course,
to
of course. Yeah, yeah.
anybody?
So what you're referring to, there was an article that this was based off of that came out in 1983 in California
No
Magazine.
way. Are you
Yeah,
kidding?
yeah.
So it's
Yeah.
actually strictly based off an article?
Well, so yeah, and they go
Um,
into two different pilots. One of them's named Possum.
wow.
Yeah, and it kind of summarizes, and the photography, the aerial photography in the magazine. I'll post a link
Oh my
to the
gosh.
article. It's been
Well, this
cataloged
is fun
online. You can read.
because when we said we were going to do the episode, it was like, oh, it's based on the Top Gun school. That's enough. That's enough to dig into, and we can. What's it? Present? Didn't really even go on to think that it would have been thought of to have been optioned after somebody's like article, a journalist write up of like
Yeah.
actual pilots and stuff like that. You're kind of blowing my mind because we didn't even talk about that.
Yeah, yeah. So that the bigger thing that I went into, because those things get twisted around so much, and it's kind of just the flavor of it without any particular incidents. There's not a plot to it. It's more of an expose on like, hey, did you know this is a school that's still going on from the Vietnam, that kind of thing.
Well,
But
much like the Fast and the Furious
yeah,
article, it's
yeah.
just like, hey, this is a happening out there. This is the culture going on around it. People might be interested to know what's happening.
And there's wacky call sign names, and it's a whole culture.
It's
Yeah.
a whole world in and of itself. It's worth writing about.
Yeah, so that is a big piece of it. The other piece has to do with the Navy themselves and their involvement in fueling a lot of the changes related to the film. In terms of having military involvement, you can't just rent a Tomcat plane, to my knowledge, or if you can, you know what I mean? It's like it's billions of
To
dollars.
write a check to rent a F-16.
It doesn't work. So what the Navy does, what we'll get into kind of the history of how all this comes about. We'll start with the film and then go backwards in time to like how we got to 86 at least. But they offer access to the resources, and all they charge for is the fuel and the pilot hours, because they have a 24/7 salary anyway. So it's not like the taxpayer money is paying extra for the pilot to do. They would be flying regardless of whether it's for a camera on them or not. So for this first film, which was a meager 15 million budget, only 1.8 went to paying for the pilots and the planes, which seems crazy that it's like, oh, film a film and it only costs a little under 2 million to have all this access to military bases and equipment and pilots and all of that stuff. Such a steal.
Yeah, this is insane. It's even in 86 money. That's
yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, because you'd think it'd be like, oh god, it'd be half the budget and they'd be straining. I was like, no, it was a steal. So
yeah,
how this came to be, one of the producers, Don Simpson, had done in 82 An Officer and a Gentleman, and the Navy refused access because it doesn't portray everyone in a great light, and there's language and sex, and it it won Oscars, but it was not regarded by the Navy as indicative of their establishment, and so cost them millions. They couldn't film where they needed to film with equipment that they needed, and so on. And so from some sources I could see, this producer Don Simpson and Bruckheimer had visited Navy headquarters in Washington to see if they'd support Top Gun before even writing it, before even having a draft of the script, and they kind of had to improvise what it was going to be about, because they didn't want to do it unless they could get the resources from the military.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
So from the start,
so it's kind of, I like these things where it starts this 3-dimensional puzzle where everybody has, the whole project kind of has to move together before anybody gets too far. Which in this case, if you're partnering with the United States military, that's probably a good idea. Yeah.
Especially if you struggled budget wise on your previous thing, and you're in this,
and the set piece of your movie are people in jets.
Yeah, can't be done without it. Yeah. So with that, though, the Pentagon has a ton of leeway in what happens. And, this is the the big question surrounding this whole episode that we're doing is like, when does it become propaganda or
Right.
creative license? Or, of course they want it to be presented accurately, but like the way that the ranks work and how the protocol is and whatnot. But it's like,
Right.
what about issues that happen within the military? Lord knows there's a million.
Or
So
like the way an exercise is actually carried out, probably drastically,
yeah, yeah.
fantasized here. Where, and probably there are situations in these training exercises throughout most of the bulk of the second act, in the new film at least, and most of the first one, that just would, most people would, in the real situations, be throwing up their hands because, well, they would never send that many planes out at the, or
Yeah,
whatever.
yeah.
I have no idea, but I can only assume that much.
Yeah, so it's all sort of a black box when it comes to how much they have approval of on the script. But I know for a couple things based on some documentaries about the original one, they changed Goose's crash not to involve two planes together in a collision. Just it was a solo
Oh,
thing.
okay.
That was a big
Interesting.
thing that they said we don't want to have, because I guess that shows some sort of ineptitude or something against, like, we
Right.
can't.
Technically it's changed to like just a malfunction, just a
Right, of the
technical
ejector.
malfunction. So that makes sense. I see. I see.
So some stuff like that where it's like, well, that could happen, but does it disparage them a little bit? So got to change it. And then same thing with the love interest. Originally, it was a non-commissioned officer serving on the base, but fraternization within the ranks is a no-no. So a naval commander who was involved on the base when they were filming suggested, oh, why not have it be a civilian instructor and analyst instead? And this woman
Mm.
was actually based on a real contractor, Christine Fox.
Oh
Um,
wow.
and so she's got a whole Wikipedia page and everything. And she actually in 2013 served as acting deputy secretary of defense. And she became the highest
Wow.
ranking woman in the history of the Pentagon.
Oh
Uh,
my god. The
much
lady
later on.
oh my gosh.
Yeah, that's the love
The-
interest.
so when you're looking at Top Gun 86, that's an echo of who you're looking at.
Mhm. Yeah, yeah.
That's crazy.
I just thought that was cool that of the things that were fictionalized, that was a real person. And
Wow.
she did
I
hang
mean,
out at the
I'm
bar,
blown.
Yeah, she was
Listen,
not.
man, this is all
Yeah.
gravy. I am sitting here blown away that this stuff actually has any real literary basis, like at all. Like that there's an
Yeah.
article that that so many ideas out of this are pulled out of here, and that McGinnis's character is full on a real person, basically.
Mhm. Yeah, who is the
This is crazy.
highest role for a female
Yeah,
in
like an
Department of Defense, yeah.
incredible, like historical person.
Yeah. Yeah, she rose
This is
up.
incredible.
The one thing that is not true at all that is central to the whole premise is the trophy and the competitiveness between them. All of that is for
Or like finishing
storytelling.
first.
Yeah, yeah, and, like,
Yeah.
who's the best?
That's
Because
funny. So there's
it's
no
hard to
rank,
have.
like if you finish top of your class, like no.
No, because, yeah,
It's not
it's
a it's
hard.
not a it's not a competition.
Well, because it's hard to have stakes without a war when when it's 86, and this is a school, like, you kinda gotta have. But it's funny because there's, instructor Pete Pettigrew, who was heavily involved in the consultation for the film, and he said if a trophy existed, no one would graduate because everyone would die. Like, these people
Oh
are
my
so
god.
competitive. He said it would be a horrible decision.
It would be a bloodbath. Good
Yeah.
god.
And then, like you said, in terms of the logistics of it, like the actual formations and stuff for the filmmaking, they had to film at a lower altitude to show the mountains so you get a sense of speed. The planes are much closer for framing the drama. Like, you wouldn't want to engage. You'd be engaging miles away before you get
Mhm,
right
mhm.
up next to the enemy. And so that doesn't work for framing a shot, having two planes in the frame. You can't film a
Right.
mile away. So all that stuff is nonsense when it comes to the.
And that's
Yeah.
interesting because they actually build that into it this time. That all becomes part of the mission that they are trying to learn.
To get close?
They The mission is that they have to stick to a 100-foot altitude in
Oh, yeah.
formation, so that actually
That's funny.
the mission that they're trying to carry out necessitates exactly what you do see on screen. So it's almost as if the whole movie is like a draft two,
Right. Trying to be more accurate, yeah.
in a much better way of not trying to like redo the original, but like of like
Uh-huh.
how a movie like this actually works. Because by the end of this movie, the whole movie consists of Maverick's character teaching these Top Gun pilots how to carry out this real world mission for the third act. And so by the time the third act rolls around, you've been doing it and training it and looking at every section of this thing, and it's so well captured and so
Mm.
well articulated that when it's actually playing out into the third act, you know exactly what's going on. You're up to
Yeah.
speed with everybody because you've been taught along with them what the problems are. And all of those problems are everything that you basically laid out, is they have to stick really, really tight together. They can't go above a certain altitude or they will be seen on radar.
Yeah, yeah.
So all of that is built into the drama of keeping the filmmaking and the shots actually energized
Mm.
and like something you want to look at. It might not be like in training what you would do, but that's the point. They're training to do that type
Do a
of
thing. Gotcha. Yeah, that's cool. I didn't even know that the new film had a exchange that was counteracting sort of what probably the military people thought as foolishness, or maybe what the Pentagon just had to say, well, whatever, they have to film it, so we can't
Right.
be so
All the
stickery.
problems they had. Right. Exactly. All
Yeah,
the problems they had to figure out for the 86 film, they actually like made part of the drama for the new one.
that's cool.
But it actually it had me thinking again on the development of all these
Mhm.
things when they're putting together the visual look of this and they're figuring out what those problems are. Oh man, they have to be really close together. That would never work. Wh- What precedent was there for something like this? I mean, especially maybe even with government involvement. But I'm trying to think. I know you know a lot of World War II movies are probably made or that kind of thing. But I'm trying to understand like actually what drama narratives were
Mhm.
produced at a similar level or some sort of comparable level for the time that the
Right.
filmmakers in 86 would have been drawing on.
Yeah, so I looked into where the Department of Defense or the Pentagon fits into Hollywood. They do have an entertainment media office. It's officially a part of the US Department of Defense, and
Oh,
like I said,
weird.
it's the use of F-18s, other military assets, in exchange for some sort of script control, and this isn't just the Navy, because it's the whole Department of Defense. Every branch except for the Marines has some office on Wilshire Boulevard in Los Angeles, which
Oh
is
my
hard to think
gosh.
about. Yeah, um,
I did
and I
not
look yeah.
even conceive of such a thing. Holy crap.
There's so much because and I think this movie obviously was a big keystone
Right.
in pushing that, because I found this study, thank God somebody else did it, went through 30,000 pages of documents through the Freedom of Information Act requesting
Good lord.
government files, and the Pentagon and CIA have exercised editorial control of over 2,500 films and shows, which is
Wow.
crazy because you'd think, oh, maybe a couple
Wow.
hundred or the big ones or Saving Private Ryan or whatever, but 2,500 is a lot more than the people combing through the documents said, oh, the military made decisions on the script. Uh,
That's crazy. I have never really considered some of that.
yeah. Well, and there's a lot too where films weren't made because they were denied assistance. And it's like, we want to do this movie this way,
Gosh.
but it's gonna be too hard. But that might change with CGI, and, that's kind of why this one is interesting, the newer one, in the sense that they did do it
Right.
all real when maybe you wouldn't have to. But in terms
Right.
of getting back to your question, sort of the precedent, I was flabbergasted to see that the first Academy Award ever for Best Picture was a film very similar to Top Gun and
What?
involved yeah. So, 1929, the film is called Wings, and it is a silent
Oh my
film.
god.
Yeah. Do you know
No
about
way.
this at
No,
all or
no, no.
no?
Like you say the title, I'm like, oh, I've heard this 1,000 times,
Yeah.
but no, I'm like, please go on and describe the movie for the audience.
Yeah, it is a silent drama about a World War I combat pilot veteran, praised for its realistic air combat sequences, thousands of extras, substantial support from the War Department, because it wasn't even called the Department of Defense at that point. And
Wow.
then in terms of, like, cultural significance, it was hugely popular, historians might say, due to Lindbergh's transatlantic solo flight, which happened a year before it had wide release, and so people were already excited about planes
Wow.
and
Okay.
and
Yeah.
World War
Yeah.
One ending. Yeah, so what's crazy about this is
Aviation, it's hot,
yeah,
baby.
yeah. I I I was flabbergasted to see what, just because we're talking about, one might say, creative control from the military side of things. This was before the Hays Code, before self-censorship from Hollywood. So this is
Oh,
also,
wow.
it's got a bunch of firsts and crazy kind of things. The first wide release to show nudity, specifically
Really?
male nudity, because there's nude men in physical exams in a
Wow.
room before, and there's
All right,
female, yeah.
wings.
Yeah.
All right, wings.
There's female breasts when this woman is changing. There's potentially also lesbian women in a cafe
All right,
as they
wings.
pass through. And a lot of people say it's definitely the first male kiss on the mouth, but it also might be the first
All right,
LGBT. Yeah.
wings.
Because
I could do it all day,
Yeah.
Taylor. This movie rules.
in the cards, and I'll post a link to this scene because some people are like, oh, maybe it's fraternal and they were, pilots together. But it's like the woman is off to the side and they're embracing and stroking each other's hair, and the guy dies and he kisses him right before. And in the
Wow.
cards, it's like, oh, our friendship. But of course, learning a lot of history from illiterate, it's like friendship was a very veiled coded word, and it's like all of the other homoerotic overtones in the film lead it to be, and pre-Hays Code, it's got a lot of that stuff, which is interesting.
You could be
historically
my wingman anytime,
because it also has such a connection to the military, which Top Gun, I think, is also like this bro-y, chauvinistic, potentially on the negative side of things.
Well, I mean, that's been something to come. Well, then the other side of that, to parallel what you're just saying, it's through the 80s, through the 90s, into the 2000s, very macho. But then another analyzation of the entire thing has come about and popularized over maybe the last 20 years is the homoerotic overtones between Iceman and Maverick. I mean, and I look at it now, when I first watched the original Top Gun for the first time in 2018, it was pretty obvious to me what everybody had been talking about in terms of, I had heard those jokes before, and I'm just like, oh yeah, this is up there in terms of like one of the like gayest accidental gay films I've ever seen. It's up there with like Nightmare on Elm Street 2, incredible movie, but I'm just these movies that kind of walk into that sphere. So I'm again, it's all the universe talking at me. Everything makes sense. Everything is in line because Wings, Iceman and Maverick are paralleled right back in it, babe. I mean, it's all there. I'm stunned at how many parallels ring consistent throughout decades when it comes to this material in particular. This is ridiculous.
Well, and what's crazy too is as time progresses, so we go through the World War II era, it's like we're in the same business, the military and Hollywood, like Disney and the war effort we've talked about before. Not so much then as it goes into the Vietnam War, it's more transactional. We're not in the same business, but we each have something that the other might want.
Yeah.
Because Bruckheimer said Top Gun and Pearl Harbor wouldn't exist without military approval. And a lot of stuff that you don't even think about. So like Transformers needed them for Army locations and access. All three Iron Man films got military support, which makes sense because
anytime you've seen the vehicles rolling out and the troops coming in, they're coming to say that basically, that's it. That's them.
But then with that
any
comes
post-apocalyptic, any kind of superhero film where things are getting out of hand for the public, creature films where New York City is locked down, all of it.
Yeah, which is, I mean, with that then comes in the back of the mind, the 2,500 films, the Entertainment Media Office of the Department of Defense had some sort of script control on Iron Man. It begs the question. So that's what's interesting is they didn't back the Avengers because they found the SHIELD organization, which is of the Pentagon, to be too unrealistic. So they said once Marvel hit here, we're not going to be involved.
That's
or give
when they
them
took their door out. That's very interesting. Very, very good. Okay, interesting.
Yeah. So that kind of stuff. And then I even found through some of these documents that these people do the research on, this e-media office internally for Top Gun, quote, completed rehabilitation of the military's image, which had been savaged by the Vietnam War. So it's definitely in their purview, but it's also not a surprise.
Oh, so Top Gun was a psyop to get the public to turn favorably in view of the military. I see it all. No, I'm just playing.
But it's like it's almost so opaque that you're like, yeah, of course, or like it's obviously they would want to be viewed in a positive light. Even up to like more modern 2013, there was a film called Lone Survivor, and they had it quoted in some internal memos as a 2-hour infomercial. So this is not news, but it just is. I became more aware of it with like it's a transactional thing.
From my understanding of it is it obviously it can't be negative light if you can have a borderline no, yeah, everything is in place, that's fine. If it's positive, then they are more than willing to help you.
Yeah.
But then that's really interesting for filmmakers having to tread that line of like, well, how much do we change this for them to give us the resources we need to achieve the vision? But how much is the vision changed by the context surrounding achieving the resources? That's a very interesting problem.
Yeah. But it's also in a devil's advocate way, it is a problem regardless of what you produce that you have to balance
Right.
the competing interests of the things you want to go film at somebody's house. Even
Absolutely.
as an independent filmmaker, it's like, well, they're not going to want us traipsing around their front yard or whatever. How do we give them assurance that
Right.
we're going to do
Right.
right by them? It's all that. It
It's
just
very
yeah.
very similar. And on the surface it sounds like, oh, they have script approval, but it's like I guarantee you it's not that big a deal. For like 80% of these projects, it's really not that big a deal. They just are making sure that they're not being disparaged or like helping people that are like trying to like, you know, call them out for, like they want to avoid being called out. They want to avoid they don't want, they're not going to help you disparage them. But I'm just saying,
Yeah.
it's like, well, if what they have to offer helps you, you can lean into that and it's going to make it better.
Yeah.
If that's not the point of your story, that's the job of the filmmakers and the producers to walk that line and thank you for that. No, thank you for that.
Yeah. I guess the downside comes when you have to look at what our perceptions of the US military is as it relates to, like, we get our
Right.
information of World War II from World War II based films and media. And so
Right.
then what does our current military, like, what does that look like
Well, and it's not to say that
culturally?
these
Yeah.
projects can't happen. I'm sure a lot of
Right,
projects
right.
don't happen because they don't have, but they can achieve their visions in a different way that doesn't require direct help from the U.S. military. And sometimes I'm sure maybe they're not able to find those paths, but on a lot of other cases, I'm sure that they probably are. Again, not everybody really. This is a particular thing. It's not like everybody needs. You just like this. 2,500 sounds big, but like that, it's what I mean. That's over the course of many years. This is a slower, smaller thing than even it sounds. I'm still though shocked that every department of the U.S. military has an office down here on Wilshire. I mean, that's bananas to me. But
Well,
now
they said the
talking
one
about
that
it,
the
it's
one
like,
that
well,
didn't, yeah,
kind of makes sense.
the one that didn't get a bunch of bumps. So like the Air Force said 100 scripts was going through in 12 months after the first Top Gun, which is a ton from from them to be able to say, oh wow, now all of a sudden tons of people want to make this stuff. But it was the Coast Guard was like, yeah, we didn't get anything. Nobody wants to make a
No.
Coast Guard movie, which is sad.
Oh man, that's not true. There's some Kevin Costner movie, I think. It's some amazing Kevin Costner
Yeah,
Coast Guard movie.
but
Anyway,
they
they
didn't
got
get
it
a bump.
eventually. They
Yeah.
got it eventually.
Let's
That's funny.
let's jump into the sequel stuff because you said, oh, it's 36 years. You'd think,
Lord.
oh, of the 2,500, why wasn't where's Top Gun 2, 3, 4, 5, 6?
Right,
If
the
this seemed
biggest non-franchise franchise.
Yeah. So this was pitched to the Navy, of course, in the early 90s. And a lot of it too was, well, if we can't get this, why don't we use the leftover footage? And they're like, we have none. Like every single
Yeah,
scrap of what we filmed of planes flying, we put in that film because it was so difficult to get all of that.
good God.
The reason that the proposed sequel also didn't go anywhere was there was real life scandal and issues, criminal conduct of Top Gun aviators. There was this
No.
convention, yeah, it's called the Tailhook Incident.
Oh, no.
Happened in '91. It was Navy pilots. It was this convention that happened every year, and it was like year after year, it just got more raucous and lewd and lascivious and horrible.
No.
And I guess this was kind of the nail in the coffin. Navy pilots sexually assaulted 83 women and 7 men at this Las Vegas Hilton hotel, which cast, of course, then with the Top Gun
What?
situation, womanizing and drinking in this establishment in a
Oh my God.
horrible light. Actually, the Secretary of the Navy resigned following this because it was
Oh
like
my God.
something should have been done about all of this nonsense within this particular branch. So it wasn't something that they wanted to brag about or bring up.
Yeah.
It just clearly was not the time or the
Not a good
place.
time, Tom.
Yeah, to throw out Top Gun again in the 90s. And so then another decade goes by. Tony Scott is on it again in 2010. But then, of course, his death in 2012 halted it until 2017. And then
Mm.
here we are, you have to
I
not
didn't
be
know that they
talking
were
about it
trying
for.
again.
Mhm. Yeah.
There's always been the rumblings, and there's always been an appetite for the sequel. I just never knew that there was any real movement in the especially that Tony Scott ever actually got back in the boat.
Yeah, it was just a brief thing in Variety I saw. It said he wanted to focus on the end of dogfighting and the role of drones, sort of making it different, not just
Interesting.
doing it again, really
Yeah.
changing things. So yeah, that's why it took so long, was because again, you need the Navy, and if they're like, we're not ready to endorse this, it's a timing thing, like with anything. Then that made me look into this the E-media office. You know how they said, "Oh, 2-hour infomercial." Like, what did they do with Maverick, this new one?
Hmm.
That's what I found, the production assistant agreement. I'll post a link to it because somebody somebody posted it, or I guess it's
Oh
public
no.
access. But one of the points that was interesting was it formally stipulated the Pentagon's right to quote weave in key talking points. So who knows what those were in this film. Um,
Oh man.
But somebody said in this other article that, like, with these sorts of things, perhaps if you did wanna legislate some of this, there could at least be a disclosure before the opening saying, like, there was CIA or Department of Defense influence in this. If I mean,
I
I guess
mean,
that's all
you're
that could be done.
watching the most the state of the art aircraft do
Yeah,
incredible things in incredible images. It is almost, I mean, God, I hate to say, but obvious that to achieve this type of film, that's what's there. I mean, to my, I mean, maybe I'm not
yeah.
everybody, but when I look at this, I go, I mean, that's pretty clear. If unless it's all computer, which we know it's not, that this required direct cooperation from the U.S. military. Again, not every movie with a jet in it is about learning
Mhm.
how to fly it at 100 altitude.
Yeah,
Like
yeah, yeah.
that, they're often just props or set pieces in the background. They help move transitions along and those types of things. This is a very particular type of film. This type of film, again, this didn't happen for near 4 decades. Yeah, the military services thousands of productions, but hardly few live up to this scale of production with the impetus on those military machines.
Yeah. The thought is it a good thing or bad thing that they're, of course, they're involved, but, like, at what point do
Right.
you have to say, "Well, Top Gun,
Right.
surely," like you said, does it have the military in it?
Propaganda.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's interesting looking at the film because the original film definitely obscured a bit who's the enemy, what's at stake here, and
Yeah, yeah.
then it's all really close. We're in the school, it's the guys, it's the romance, that kind of thing. We take it even a step further in this one. And I think that that's a lot of people talking online right now. Are what does that mean when when the enemy presented in this film looks like a basically a Death Star fighter pilot, blacked out. You can't see anything about him. There are no details. We don't know where we are.
Yeah.
And they dance around naming the country or anything that could identify it whatsoever. And we know that when the trailer was released, we people saw that the trailer had been edited to remove a couple patches on Maverick's jacket. A patch that solidifies that Taiwan as a country was
Yeah, yeah.
edited to be removed. So that was outcry. But guess what? It's back in the movie. All of these things have the political sphere around this is really interesting. But the most amazing thing about it is when you watch the movie, walking out of that political sphere, that's not what the narrative is about at all. The narrative is not about the military. The narrative is not about how great this country is. The narrative is not about how great the Top Gun school is. The narrative, this one, rests solely on grief and moving on.
Yeah.
It's on the shoulders of a aging fighter pilot who does not see himself in the future, who has not gone anywhere in his life. Where does that road lead you after 36 years, the last time we saw him? That's what this movie is about. And that's why it's connecting to audiences, because it's not about how good the military is. It's not about beating the enemy. It's about understanding our place in the world as time moves on around us and where our place is in that future and how to build a place in that future. that serves us, that is healthy for us.
Right.
That's what the film is really about. And I think that's ultimately why it's wildly successful. And I think that's why ultimately the politics of it don't matter. Because they're as much as they can trying to tell you maybe in those details. It doesn't matter. Don't worry about that. That's not the point. Think about Goose.
Right. Which maybe is also why the Navy is okay. You know, they're like, well, it could help us.
I'm baffled that we pulled one of the most like two-dimensional macho cheap characters out of what is really a thin movie, plopped him in 2022 and had the world to say about what's happened in between these two movies. I think it's incredibly relevant for our country, for our men, for our families to see what Maverick's story has brought to the screen in terms of like how the security and breath it gives each of us to just exist in the wake of tragedy or grief and death. I think it's much needed for our men and our fathers and brothers. And I think that's what happened this weekend when people went to the theater.
Yeah. It's crazy that it did so well. To me, it's like another Tom Cruise Mission Impossible thing, but it outperformed all those as well.
Dude, I mean, you know, I'm not a crazy, you know, Tom Cruise he makes good movies, but they don't touch me. And I'm stunned that Pete Maverick is like showing me how to breathe a little easier. Yeah. Like I mean that's what people are going to the theater to see this week in the coming months. It's really encouraging to me that people are responding to the thematics that this film has to offer. I couldn't be happier that we're talking about these types of things with this type of set piece material, this type of star power, and it's getting this type of response. I mean,
yeah.
Hey, but I'm biased.
or you like you said, you can in a way see beyond the curtain, and somebody else might be like, "Oh, I had fun. The military must be fun," you know?
Right?
And it's just one to one. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's still that it's gonna be the same thing it was in '86 for kids. You know, it's still Hot Wheel planes playing. It's still that, but boy, does this one have an emotional core that is just touching. That's what you want in a movie.
Yeah.
And man, it took 36 years to get it done.
Yeah.
Gosh. Oh man. Taylor, I can't thank you enough. This has been a blast.
Thank you.
Guys, thanks for sticking with us. We appreciate you listening all the way to the end. If you could, please give us a rating, suggest an episode to one of your buddies, and get in touch with us. You never know when we're going to do an episode about that thing you want to know all about.
You can reach us at ILLITERATEPOD on Instagram or illiteratepod@gmail.com. Thank you all so much for listening, and we'll catch you next week.